in terms of our relationship with Canada. And same with the following year in 1906. That was 1905 I'm talking about. 1906 when they went to Abitibi, Matachewan Flying Post, Missinaba, Chapleau Cree, and all these areas. Same thing. Same thing. Assurances that we could use our lands forever. And the taken up clause was not even talked about. The taken up clause was not even talked about in any of those presentations. I wonder why. I wonder why the taken up clause was not mentioned. I wonder why the government or the commissioners did not say what their real intention was. I wonder why. I know why. Because if they talked about their intentions and what they were trying to do in terms of taking our land, our people would not have signed the treaty, and the commissioners would have went back. They would have failed. Their bosses would have been mad at them. They would probably have got fired and saying, well, what's going on? You can't even get this treaty signed. They were career civil servants, and they were under extreme direct orders from their bosses to come and see us, get that under any kind of situation, get the treaty signed and bring it back to Ottawa. And they did. But in order to do that, they had to make, they said good words to us so that we'd accept the treaty. So that's basically the treaty. And again, when you look at the treaty, if you Google the treaty and look it up, you'll find the actual treaty document there with the signatories and the markings of our grandparents and our great-grandparents in terms of the treaty. The adhesions back in 1929-30. When I talk about the treaty in 1905 and 1906, it was only in the areas south, on the Albany River and south. What about the north? What about Atawabaskat, Winnisk, Fort Severn? What about north of there? This is where the adhesions came in. The adhesions in 29-30 included then Atawabaskat, Winnisk, Fort Severn, and all those other areas that were not treatied, if I could use that word, in 1905 and 1906. In the course of our history, there's some warriors and true leaders that have come about in the course of our history in our Mushkego territory. To name a few, Andrew Rickard, the founder of Treaty Number 9, the former chief of Moose Cree, was a true leader in our area, as were many, many others. And James Wesley was another true leader, a chief in Saskatchewan First Nation and an elder. And back in 1987 in the treaty conference that was being held in 1987, remember I said that the diaries were not found until 1995? Well, he's speaking in 1987, a good 8 years before the treaty diaries were even found. And he's speaking at this conference, and he had very, very profound words. He had a very, very profound vision well before the treaty diaries were found. And he said, there was very important things that were being said. And he heard this from his grandparents and his parents in terms of the treaty-making process. There were very important things that were said. There was somebody there that did the writing, he says. This is what's lost. Somebody there did the writing. This is what's lost, he's saying. Maybe one day it'll show up, he says. I believe in the Bible, he says. It says in the Bible that the things that were told in darkness will also be told in light. That's how I understand it. It's very hard. It will be told yet one day, he said. This is way before the diaries were even discovered and what we're talking about today in terms of our understanding. And he had a vision. He had a vision that someday things will be told. The truth will come out someday, he's saying. You know what? That day is today. That day is today. James Wesley's vision is coming true. Isn't that exciting? In terms of what he saw, what he thought, and what he prophesied and what he visioned back in 1987. The treaty diaries record many, many oral parts that were not part of the treaty document. And the treaty diaries, what I talked about, support what our elders have been saying all along. Our elders understanding that we never give up our land. We never give up our land. And that's why it's very, very important of the evidence of the treaty diaries that we use that to our advantage. And we use that to educate our people. We use that to educate our young people. That we put this in our education systems. We put this in our schools so our people and our young people can learn and understand it, so that they can have a good understanding of how the treaty came about back in 1905. Let's look at today in 1912, 2012, 2013. Where do you think the authority of the government comes from for them to be able to make the Mining Act, the Forestry Act, the Far North Act, all these acts? Their authority, they think, comes from the actual treaty document, that taken up lands, taken up clause. They say we can eliminate native rights. We can consult with you a little bit because the treaty document says that you give up your lands. You agree to it. You put your mark on there. That's where they get their authority, and that's their lawyers will tell them, you know, go ahead, consult with those Crees a little bit, accommodate them a little bit, but at the end of the day, we can pass these laws. They get that from the actual wording in the treaty, but they have something in store for them. We now know as a result of the diaries that we never gave up our land, and that's why we say the things we do. That's why we fight. That's why we protest. That's why we stand with the prime ministers and ministers and go to Toronto and say we have treaty rights. That's why we say those things, because we believe that we never give up our land. But the government acts like they own all of this land and they can do anything that they want. But we now know that it's not the case, and that's why we say the things we do. That's why we do the things we do, because we feel strongly about it. One of the commissioners from Canada, Duncan Campbell Scott, and I don't mind saying this, was a pure racist. He's a commissioner who sat before my grandfather to tell him all the good things so that my grandfather would sign the treaty. So a few years later, after the treaty was made in about 1920, Duncan Campbell Scott is standing before the House in the Parliament, in Cabinet, and he's speaking in support of residential schools. He's speaking in support of starting residential schools. This same commissioner that came to see us. And this is what he said. I want to get rid of the Indian problem. I want to get rid of the Indian problem, he says. I do not think, as a matter of fact, that the country ought to continuously support or protect a class of people who are able to stand alone. Why should we help these people, he's saying. Our objective, he says, is to continue until there's not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed into the body politic, and that there's no Indian question, no Department of Indian Affairs. That is the whole object of this bill. Duncan Campbell Scott wanted to get rid of Indians, and he was trying to make a law, and he was trying to influence the government to start residential schools and do all of these things so that Indians wouldn't exist anymore. And he's the same guy who came and saw us. He's the same guy who pretended to sound good so that we could accept the treaty. But really, in his heart of hearts, in his mind, he didn't like us. He didn't want us to be Indians. He thought we were a nuisance, that we were just a pain, and that we should not be protected. We shouldn't have a special status. So these are the kinds of people that we're up against. Even today, is there Duncan Campbell Scotts today in Canada, in Ontario, in Timmins, in Toronto? Yes, there is, unfortunately. And that's why we do the things we do. That's why we say the things we do. Because we want to be able to educate not only ourselves, but the general Canadian public, to tell them what really happened. How did we understand the treaty to be? And what is the treaty? And how is the diaries helping us? So we want to send a message out. We want to send a message out in terms of the treaty. One of the things that's going on this week, in January 11th, 2013, in Ottawa, is that the Prime Minister, by virtue of Chief Theresa Spence and her hunger strike and the Idle No More movement, finally he's coming to his senses and he's saying, okay, I'll have a meeting. And one of the things we want to talk about is a treaty, to set the record straight, to tell Canada, look Canada, we have a relationship here that's historic. We have a relationship here that's very, very important. We have a relationship that was understood by our people, a little bit different than your people. But the important thing is, let's work on that foundation of relationship. Let's build on that. Let's work together. Let's foster that relationship so that we can do things together, so that our people can begin to grow, so that our people can begin to have a future. So that's why we're going to Ottawa. That's why we want to meet with the Prime Minister. That's why the meeting is taking place, so that we can begin that discussion. And, and to have that discussion, it's important to know the history for you to move forward. So that's why we're doing this. We're doing this. And we at Mushkegowuk, as well as other communities and chiefs, are very, very supportive of the work that we're doing in terms of the treaty. We want to continue talking about it. We want to use the evidence that we have in terms of the diaries. We want to be able to educate not only ourselves through our schools, through our systems and institutions, and we want to be able to tell Canadians all over what the treaty means to us and why it's very, very important in terms of the future and our relationship with Canada. So now, after this presentation, now you know why we call this presentation the real agreement as already agreed to. I hope you enjoy this, and I wish you well, wish us well as we go to Ottawa to continue our discussions and as we continue our important work in terms of the treaty. Miigwech.